We had a 7 a.m. induction and it works. We don't have to have a C-section right now. My water had been broke for such a long time, but I advocated for myself and I said, no, I never saw that doctor again. And the contractions were still just not strong enough. This was late. It was like 10 o'clock at night. Turn it all off and see what my body does. You have a plan of how these babies are supposed to come into the world. If it doesn't do that, then let's go forward with the C-section. The first baby was born. I was living this like double twin mom life. I'm gonna have the grace that I need in those moments. That was the first time that I had held him. That was the biggest desire of my heart, and I didn't get that. Whether or not that's the way that I wanted it to go, that is what happened. Okay, it has been 20 months almost since I delivered my twins. And I thought it would be fun to document this, even for just myself one day, to look back and remember. I just want to share my experience and my delivery experience of twins. I'm Emma. Like I said, I'm a mom of identical twin boys who are 20 months old. And a lot of what I share on my channel is about bringing the Montessori philosophy into our home. I was pregnant with mono-di twins, and so those are identical twins. So I had one placenta, two babies in separate sacs. And with the doctors that I was seeing, just by the nature of a twin pregnancy, naturally it's more high risk. And mono-di twins are kind of even higher risk than fraternal twins, which are di-di twins. For me, they wanted me to have the babies by 37 weeks. So that was kind of always the plan in my mind, was if I didn't have them before that, at 37 weeks, that was when I would be induced. So I had a very regular, healthy pregnancy. Things went well. There was one complication early on. My cervix was shortening, and so I had to have a cerclage placed, which is like a stitch that just keeps it shut and helps you stay pregnant longer, and that prevents preterm labor. So I had that done probably even before I was 20 weeks pregnant. They found that, and I had the cerclage placed, and then things were fine from that. I got that removed at 36 weeks. And then when I was in for my OB appointment at 36 weeks, I was already 4 centimeters dilated. And I had been having contractions kind of on and off, not very intense or anything, over that week from 36 to 37 weeks. We actually even went into the hospital twice. Again, looking back, I didn't know what it was like to be in labor. And so clearly those times I probably did not need to go to the hospital, but I was a little extra apprehensive because I knew it was twins and I thought maybe they could come really fast. And I also really wanted them to come and be here. We had a scheduled induction on November 22nd. So my due date was actually December 13th, I think. But we knew we would have the babies by the 22nd. So we thought. We had a 7 a.m. induction, and we called the hospital beforehand to just make sure that they had room for us. And they did, and so we got in the car, we drove down to the hospital, got all checked in. We had a wonderful nurse who hooked up my IVs and got monitors on for the boys. I had to have them monitored the whole time, and that was a little obnoxious, but it was just kind of what was necessary. My doctor came in around 9 o'clock. She broke my water, which we had talked about the day before at my OB appointment, that maybe we'd start with that and see if that kicks things into gear, and then probably start Pitocin shortly after that. So she broke my water. 2 hours passed. Nothing more happened. We were just kind of hanging out in our room. And then after those 2 hours, we started Pitocin, which is kind of an artificial drug that helps get contractions happening and moving. So they can increase it by a percentage every 30 minutes. And so we were kind of just on that cycle of increasing the Pitocin. And once I was on Pitocin, no longer would I be able to eat any solid foods. I was on a clear liquid diet. So I was able to have like apple juice and cranberry juice, bone broth, but that was kind of it. I wasn't expecting that going into it. So I tried to eat a little bit more before I really shouldn't have eaten anymore. And then that was it for food. It was 10 a.m. when the Pitocin, 10 or 11 a.m. when Pitocin started, and that started running all day slowly increasing. And it was around 6 p.m. that contractions like really started picking up, and I had to start being more intentional about like breathing through them and working through them. And I had a doula and my husband there, as well as my mom. I was grateful to have all of those people there with me. Obviously, I wanted my husband there. I really wanted the doula there to kind of help coach my husband too on counter pressure and just kind of ways to help me in the midst of labor, because I had never done this before, and I just thought it would be a great idea to have an extra person there with more experience of what that's like to support someone. So she was wonderful. And then my mom is a nurse, and I love my mom dearly, and I really wanted her there. And because we were having 2 babies, I had really prepared in my mind kind of the possible outcomes. Either they were both going to be born vaginally and they would be both fine and perfect and everything was great. Or I would have a C-section and I would have, the babies that way. Or in a C-section or vaginal, that one baby would not be okay right away and have to go off to the NICU. And if that was the case, I wanted to have someone with me, and I wanted to have someone with that other baby. And so I knew that if my mom was there and my husband and a doula was just a bonus, that someone would be able to stay and support me, and someone would be able to go and be with the other baby if that happened. And so that was really a big intentional choice of having those many people with me in the laboring process. And so 6 o'clock rolled around. I labored from like 6 till 2 in the morning pretty intensely. Honestly, this was probably my favorite part of the whole labor, because we had the lights down low. We had some like praise and worship music playing. I had my mom, she brought like her whole apothecary of essential oils and things like that. And so she put oils on me, and we were diffusing oils in the room. I brought an image of Jesus, and I would just gaze into his eyes through contractions, and my husband would, support me. And he's a coach for other people, and he does a lot of coaching on how to effectively breathe during intense situations. And so he was great to help me calm my breathing and work through every contraction that came. By 2 in the morning, I had taken a little break from the monitors. I labored in the bathroom for a little bit, and I was just getting so tired and very worn out. And so we were going to move back to my bed, and I wanted to be checked. And so they checked me. And at this point, we had been laboring intensely for, close to 8 hours. And I had moved from a 4 to a 6. And that was really discouraging to me at the time, because the nurse said to me, she said, "Now you're in active labor." And I remember thinking, like, active labor? Like, what was the last 8 hours? Because that was pretty active to me. And then we really had a decision to make, because going into this labor, I really wanted to do it naturally without pain medication as much as possible. But I also knew that I wasn't opposed to that if it was seeming like, a good choice in the moment. And I remember the nurse saying to me, she said, "Emma, you have to choose how you want to come out of this. Either you get the epidural and you can rest and take some time and pick back up with it in a couple of hours and save your energy, or you can kind of push through, keep going, and you might be completely depleted by the end." And that really stuck with me, to think that I wanted to be more present to it, and I wanted to have that rest. And so at about 2 in the morning, I decided that I would get the epidural. And so they called the doctors that do that. They came down, gave me the epidural, and then I was able to rest and sleep a little bit. And at some point in this time, because they were monitoring the babies, and they were monitoring them on the outside of my belly, there's like they strap them to you, and it was hard to track them because one of them was so low that they needed to get better in monitoring. And so one of my son, baby A, who was lower, we had to put a scalp monitor on him at some point to monitor him more closely, and then any of the concerns of like him desatting and things like that all stopped because the monitoring was just much more accurate. So there never really was an issue, but there was concern that there was something going wrong because the monitoring was just not tracking him very well. So we made that switch. That was a little bit earlier in the evening, but nonetheless, that was good. So got the epidural, I rested, which was just kind of odd to be able to like sleep in the middle of labor, but I did. And it was probably about 7 or 8 in the morning when, the nurses came back in. There was shift change. We had a new doctor, and we were ready to kind of revisit the rest of the day. So at this point, I think they stopped the Pitocin overnight so that I could rest. And then we picked that back up in the morning. The doctor in the morning, when she came in at 8 o'clock or whenever shift change was, she, looking at what's been going on for the last 24 hours. And she was very concerned that my water had been broke for 24 hours, that one of the babies was, we had to change the monitoring. And she was saying, if you don't progress any further in the next hour, then you're looking at a C-section. And I just remember being really like afraid of that. I didn't want that. So we sent out so many text messages to family and friends to just be praying for me to dilate further. And so at this point, again, I had been sleeping all night, so I hadn't even been like moving or doing anything to really progress labor any further. And so I was so grateful for the nurses that I had, because they were able to get creative with me and get me into different positions and try different things to just get labor moving along a little bit further. And it worked. Like, the doctor came back 1 or 2 hours later, I forget what it was, and she checked me and I was at an 8. So I had went from a 6 to an 8 in that time. And she was like, okay, you're good. Like, we can keep going this way. We don't have to have a C-section right now. We can just continue to see how things progress. And I was so pleased. It was just really great news. That was such an answer to prayer. During that time, my dad came and he brought some food for my husband, but he came and he saw me and he prayed with me. And that was also just such a special part of the laboring process, to have him there. I'm one of 7, and so he's been at many births, but to have him there for that short time was great. We said, okay, another 2 hours. I was back on Pitocin, and the doctor said, like, again, you'll need to progress, otherwise we're looking at a C-section. And she came back 2 hours later, and I hadn't progressed at all. I was still at an 8. And the reasons that she was pushing me to have a C-section, I think, were because they were concerned for infection, because my water had been broke for such a long time. But I wasn't ready for that yet. And I'm so grateful that I was advocating for myself in that moment, because she was very pushy, this doctor. And I just felt like she came in, she checked me, and she was ready to just get me right into an OR, like within minutes. And I just asked, can I have a second opinion? And I remember my mom had left at this point, but we had her on speakerphone, and my sister had come, who's also a nurse, and she had come to be there. And we all felt it in the room that this was very aggressive to have this recommendation to get a C-section right now. And I didn't want that. I didn't feel like I had done everything that I could to progress this more naturally. And so I asked for a second opinion, and that made her frustrated. She said something to me, this doctor. She said, I don't make any more money from a C-section. And I was like, I don't care how much money you make. It has nothing to do with you and how much money you make. And I would just remember being like furious that she would say something to me like that somehow I didn't want a C-section because I didn't want her to make more money. I was just so stupid. Anyways, that really bothered me. It really irritated me, but I advocated for myself and I said, no, I would really like a second opinion, but there was no other doctors there. And so she said, okay, you're going to have to wait till shift change. I never saw that doctor again. And so she left, and I had great nurses, and they really cared for me, and they, saw the challenges with this particular doctor and fully supported my decision to wait and hold off on the C-section. Shift change rolled around like 4 o'clock or something like that. So now we've been at this for, well over 24 hours. And then I had a new doctor, and she was really great. I really felt heard. I really felt like she wanted what was best for me and the babies, and was going to do whatever she could to help me get there naturally and avoid a C-section if possible, but also would do that if that was the best plan of action. And so the mail truck or the dump truck came. So with this new doctor who came on, she and I and some of my family members, we worked together to really come up with a plan that seemed reasonable. And so she said, okay, let's keep, getting back to the max amount of Pitocin possible, because I hadn't even been maxing that out. So we did the max amount of Pitocin. We got to that level, and the contractions were still just not strong enough and not like consistent enough. I wasn't like having any need to push or anything, nor was I dilated all of the way yet. And so we got to the full amount of Pitocin. I've been on that. And she said sometimes when you like take your body off of it, your body actually like kicks in and starts doing itself. So we said, okay, let's be done. We'll turn it all off and see what my body does. And really, if my body doesn't kick in and finish dilating and, have those contractions that are regular and getting me ready to push, then we've really kind of done what we could. And I had peace at that point to say, if we've maxed out the Pitocin, we've taken my body off of that and given it a chance to, kick it into gear on its own. If it doesn't do that, then let's go forward with the C-section. We gave my body, I think like an hour or so, maybe 2 hours, but I think it was like an hour. This was late. It was like 10 o'clock at night. And we gave my body that time to just say, okay, like do what you can. And again, we sent out a lot of text messages to family and friends to just be praying in that time. And I remember so vividly just my husband and I in that hospital room listening to some praise and worship music and just really offering all of this to the Lord, to say, Lord, like you have a plan of how these babies are supposed to come into the world. And if that is a C-section, then like I accept that and I will do that, and that is what you have planned. And if not, then like make my body do this. I had a lot of peace with wherever we were at, and it was pretty clear to tell like during that time my body was not doing a ton, but the doctor came in and she checked me and I was still at a 9. And at some point in there I had progressed from an 8 to a 9, but I was still at a 9 and my body just wasn't doing it. And I don't know if it was just because my uterus was so distended with having 2 babies in there, or if just because of all of the like starting and stopping Pitocin that it just caused a lot of confusion. I don't know. I have a lot of theories of like why it didn't work naturally, but for whatever reason, I was supposed to have a C-section. And so at like around 11 o'clock, they started coming in and preparing me for the C-section, and my husband and my doula were coming in with me. I could only have one support person, which is my husband, and then a doula doesn't count as like a personal person. They're like a medical staff. So my mom stayed back in the room and we got all ready to go to the OR. They rolled me back to the OR, and I don't think I knew what a C-section was. Like I knew what it was, but I don't think I understood like the actual process of what they do to get the babies out. And that was probably just my lack of understanding. Like in my head, I thought, oh, it's a C-section. You're numb. You won't feel anything. And like it in my head, for whatever reason, it seemed like the easier version of birth, because you didn't have to like push the baby out. They just took the baby out. And I don't know. I mean, I have never pushed a baby out and I haven't had that experience. So I So I don't know. I can't speak to that. This was still really, really hard and really physically intense, even though I was numb. You're undergoing like major abdominal surgery. Anyways, so they roll me in. I'm laying on the bed or the table, and they prep you, they put the curtain up, and they clean your tummy and sterilize everything. And it's very cold in an operating room for sanitary reasons, I think. So I was very cold and I was very shaky. And so they put on, it's like a blanket that like blows hot air. And so you're kind of like laying there still. And I had this puffy thing on me that was blowing warm air to keep me warm, which was helpful. But you just, you feel very stuck there. I'll show some pictures here of like them being born. I asked for a clear curtain so that I could see what was happening through. I really wanted to be able to see them be born, and that was great. I was able to see them. And so when we named them, baby A, he was lower. If I had a vaginal birth, he would have been born first. And then baby B was up higher. He would have been born second. That's just how they were positioned. But because we had a C-section, I didn't know like who the doctor pulled out first. The first baby was born, and I said, "Which one is it?" The doctor, she said, "It's one of them." And I was like, "Well, which one?" Because we named them, we named each one of them based on their position. And so we had a name for baby A and a name for baby B. And so then it was clear that was baby B actually was born first. And so baby B became baby A in the medical world. And then baby A was born second and became baby B. So it was a little confusing at first. And they were born at 11:23 and 11:25. Baby A was 6 pounds, 6 ounces. And baby B, the second one who was born, who was really baby A all along, was 5 pounds, 10 ounces. And so they were both beautiful, beautiful boys. They were able to place baby B on my chest right away. But my firstborn son, he did not get like a good first breath. And so he had fluid in his lungs. And so he was taken right away to the NICU. And so this is all like kind of a whirlwind of a time and of moments in our life. But my husband, he went to the NICU with one of our sons, and my doula stayed with me and my other son. Like my husband left before I was even like all stitched back up. I was stitched back up, had him with me, and then I was rolled back to my labor room because I had made that request that I could just stay there a little bit longer because it's a bigger room, and typically the recovery rooms are a lot smaller, and just having my mom there and the doula there and my husband, it just made sense to have a bigger room, and they allowed me to do that. So I go back, we are settling back in, and this is kind of the part of the story that I remember through people telling me what was happening, and I don't have very good memories of this part. But we came back, and at that point I was so hungry. So my mom was feeding me a sandwich from Jimmy John's that someone had brought earlier in the day, and I was eating. I was on the phone with my husband, who was in the NICU, to get an update on our son who was there. And then the nurses come in, I don't know, periodically after you give birth, and they do fundal checks where they like push down on your uterus to make sure that it's contracting back down. So they were doing this, and this is very painful. This is not a pleasant experience, especially when you have just, had surgery. And so they were doing that, and I was losing a lot of blood, apparently like a lot of blood. And so they called the doctor in. The doctor checked, and I was losing a lot of blood. And she said like maybe there was placenta left inside that didn't get removed, and I don't know. So we didn't know exactly what. Regardless, the bleeding needed to be stopped. On the phone, I think my husband heard this, and hearing from his perspective, this was just this like wild, like he was in the NICU with one of our sons, and he was on the phone, and I was here in a lot of pain, and then I had the other baby, and he was just like, his whole world was kind of spinning around him. But he came back, and he held our other son while I went back into the OR, and they had to put me under and do a DNC to just figure out what the bleeding was all about and get that stopped. And it turns out that there was a hole in my cervix, which I don't understand really how this is possible. I talked to my doctor, like a couple of days later after they were born, and she thought maybe it was because of my cerclage, which was that stitch that was placed like way early in my pregnancy, that could have caused that, but it was kind of a weird thing that happened. But anyway, something they did to stop the bleeding, I think they like had a balloon of some sort that they put inside of me, and then it like slowly deflated, and then they monitored me for like another probably like 4 hours, I think, to make sure that I wasn't losing any more blood. So I was still in our labor room for this whole process after recovery. I remember falling asleep in the OR because they put me under. And then I remember waking up in the recovery room, and I was so thirsty. But my husband came and met me in that recovery room, and fed me ice chips. And then eventually we were able to work back to our room. And by like around 4 in the morning, we finally were moving from labor and delivery to postpartum. They rolled me to the NICU to see my son. And so the hospital that I delivered was attached to the children's hospital. And so they were like separate hospitals, but you could get to both of them within the same building. And so we went and we saw him. And that was the first time I had a chance to hold his hand and be with him since he was born. And then they moved me to our postpartum room. So once we got settled in our postpartum room, they do all the checks, they get you all situated. And then, well, it was like it was morning time by that point. We hadn't really slept all night long. So I don't really remember exactly what we did. I think my mom probably left. She stayed with us up until we got kind of all settled and situated there. And then we probably got a little bit of sleep. And so we had really just one baby with us because my other son was in the NICU. It was a weird couple of days at that point because I was like, I have 2 children, but I like don't have 2 children because I only had one. So the following days I was living this like double twin mom life. I felt like I just had these 2 completely different experiences because I would be in my hospital room with my baby who had no cords attached, and I was like fully responsible for, and then I would like walk down the hall and I'd have my other baby and he, had all these things attached to him, and there was a nurse who was like just taking care of just him, and it was just a wild experience to go between those 2 worlds so frequently. I'll just share a few details kind of about those few days after. It would totally be like a whole nother video to really go into detail of like what those few days were. But in short, we went into the hospital on a Tuesday, the 22nd of November. So it was like Thanksgiving week. And then we labored and we were there all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday, and they were born Wednesday night at 11:30. And then Thursday morning, that was Thanksgiving Day. And we were just kind of getting officially settled. I think my 3 days started on Thursday. So I was there for a C-section. You stay in the hospital for 72 hours, or at least that's what it was at our hospital. So we stayed Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then we ended up spending one more night in our room. You can board in, so you can stay in the room, but you don't have any nursing care. You're officially discharged from the hospital, but you're allowed to stay there one more night. So we did that for one more night. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we were still in our hospital room with nursing care. Monday night, I was still in my hospital room. And then Tuesday night, we all slept in the NICU. And then the following Wednesday, we went home. So it was a full week that we were in the hospital before we got home. But now we're home. We have 2 beautiful, healthy, not even babies anymore. They're toddlers. And it's really wild. It's fun to look back and think of what that experience was, as hard as it was. But if you're a twin mom or just curious, a mom in general. Like, motherhood is hard, and we're going to go through hard things. And a lot of the hard things that we go through are kind of out of our control. And that was really my experience. And I hope that's not discouraging. I hope it's actually encouraging, because I think it taught me that I can have a plan and I can be prepared and I can do all those things, and they're really good and they're really helpful. But then as it all unfolds, we just have to do the next best thing. And that's what I had to do. I had to look at what was going on and let go of my ideal and the perfect plan I had created in my head, and just say, okay, this is the next best thing to do. This is the information that I have. This is the experiences that I have up to this point, and this is what I'm going to do next. And we did that really peacefully, actually, through the whole laboring process. I'm really proud of myself for the way that I was able to just keep doing the next thing, because it's really easy to get overwhelmed by like everything and you know, what's going to happen when we get home, and how's this going to go, and what's this going to be like. And I just had to do the next best thing. I just had to do the next feeding. I just had to do the next diaper change. I just had to rest when I could, and I had to accept the help that I could, and just trust that it's going to work out, and I'm going to have the grace that I need in those moments to do the things that I need to do. That was a lot. That was a big story. It was a big time in my life, and it took a long time to continue to process everything that had happened, because it came back to me in layers. And there were hard things, and there were sad moments. And it was a beautiful experience, but there were hard things. And I still, I feel like I'm still processing some of this. And one thing in particular that I'll share that was kind of an obstacle and something I had to get over was, not get over, but like get through, was, well, one, like I just you just keep going. You're just doing what is right in front of you. And because there was one of me and two of my children, I was physically split, I couldn't meet all of the needs that were there, and caring for myself in the midst of that. And so we got back to our room, right? We slept, and then that day, it was probably around noon, that I finally had my catheter removed and things taken off of me, and I was able to finally stand up. I was able to finally get out of bed. And I took a shower, and I got clean. And that was really hard. That was really scary to stand up. And it was painful after having a C-section. And the nurses, they knew it would be good for me though. And they pushed me to do it, and I did it. And I continued to do it in the following days. And they said, the more you move, the better it is. And I think that was true. And I remember taking my little walker and walking down to the NICU. I'm going to show you this clip. Actually, this is from later. This was when we actually got to bring our son to visit. That was a hard thing. We couldn't bring our one son, who was, healthy and good and in the hospital with us. We couldn't bring him to see his brother until he was discharged, which was 3 days later. And so we were living this double life. And so I showered, got ready, and then I was able to go to the NICU, and I got to hold my son. And that was the first time that I had held him since he had been born. And that I don't even think I realized it in the moment. And it was later, when I was recalling these events with my husband and with my mom, when that came, then I became aware of that I never got to hold him once he was born. And it wasn't until a day later, 12 hours later, that I held him in my arms. And that broke my heart. And I had to accept that I didn't do anything wrong in that moment. And it was
that was how it was supposed to be. And to trust that and to like allow healing for that sadness and that hard place. And I hope one day we have another baby. Maybe another set of twins. I'm not sure if I want that, but if that's what God has for us, I'll take it. And I hope I get to hold my baby right away. And I get to deliver them, and I get to put them right on my chest, because that was the biggest desire of my heart, and I didn't get that. But I have 2 beautiful children, and I don't think I would change the experience that we had. I think I learned a lot, and I learned a lot about myself, and I realized how strong I am. So I hope that offers you some sort of something. But regardless, that's my experience. That's what happened. That's how it is. Whether or not that's the way that I wanted it to go, that is what happened. And so it's beautiful, and it's great. Well, you guys, that was a lot. It was emotionally harder than I thought it would be to go back to those places, but I'm really glad that I was able to share that with you. If I were to offer you any encouragement, it is to advocate for yourself, to give yourself a lot of grace, to be very empathetic to yourself and those around you, because it's all, even if you've given birth before, like I'm sure every birth is just so different. And even though we might have a previous experience, something completely different might happen. And so to just give yourself a lot of grace and empathy, that things might be hard and they might be great, and but regardless, even if they're hard, they're not bad. Hard is not the same thing as bad. And I'm reminded of that. Like, yes, it was a hard labor and a hard birth, but it wasn't bad. It was beautiful. And the outcome is wonderful. I have 2 healthy children. Well, you guys, thanks for watching. I hope to see you for another video next Friday. Have a great day. Bye.